Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to give everybody just another minute or two to join. But so far, it's great to see everybody joining. Just give us a moment. Okay. Thank you for joining today's training on Demystifying the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. The training is presented to you by Switchboard in partnership with Refugee Housing Solutions. Switchboard is a one-stop resource hub for refugee service providers in the United States. And Refugees Housing Solutions provides an attempt to address, as part of CWS, and addresses the challenges that face refugees during the resettlement process here in the US. Here's a quick overview of your settings in Zoom. This is a Zoom webinar, so you're joining on listen-only mode. You may switch your audio between your computer and phone at any time under audio settings in the lower left corner of your screen. Due to the large number of learners on today's webinar, we've disabled the chat box. However, you do have the option to send messages to the speakers and co-facilitators via the Q&A. Keep an eye on the chat for messages from Switchboard and links to various resources we'll be mentioning throughout. Last, I'd like to mention that today's session will run for an hour and is being recorded. You'll receive an email with the recording, slides, and recommended resources within 24 hours. The webinar transcript, along with the recording, will also be posted on the Switchboard website within the following days. My name is Joshua Weber. I'm the Associate Director of Training at Refugee Housing Solutions, which is a technical unit at Church World Services. And with that, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today, Michael Horvath.
Thank you, Joshua, and welcome everyone. Thank you for your important work that you do, and also for joining the session to learn more about HUD and affordable housing programs. I'm Michael Horvath. I'm the Field Office Director for U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in Pittsburgh. We serve 29 counties in Western Pennsylvania, and we're within HUD's Region 3. And I'm also the project charter lead for HUD's Field Policy and Management team on New American Equity and Inclusion, with a mission on increasing access to HUD services and programs for new American communities, looking to eliminate barriers that involve language and also gaining trust in the community, and establishing community partnerships and federal interagency collaboration to reach underserved new American communities and amplifying information and resources. Prior to joining HUD, I spent 15 years with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, a variety of roles. So this is a topic and population that's very near and dear to my heart. Next slide, please. So here we have the learning objectives for the session. By the end of the session, you're going to be able to describe HUD's engagement with refugees over the past 2 years, recognize common misconceptions about HUD, list HUD's short-term and long-term rental assistance programs that are appropriate for newcomers, and explain how to locate and connect with local HUD field offices, public housing agencies, and HUD-approved housing counseling agencies. Next slide. All right, and we've got a couple of poll questions. We're beginning with a poll question to keep folks active and engaged. So the poll question is, how familiar are you with HUD's rental programs? Very familiar, moderately familiar, slightly familiar, or not familiar at all? We'll give a moment here for folks to answer. And just for other folks who are moderating here, I'm not seeing poll results coming up on my end. And there we are. So we got a good understanding of folks in the audience today, and it seems like the majority of folks about half of you are not familiar at all with programs, and then a little bit more slightly familiar, but definitely trending down towards not familiar at all. So that's really good to know. And I know that you're going to be taking a lot away from the presentation today. So we'll jump into things with the next slide. So we'll begin with just HUD's mission statement. So we've got a level set here is HUD's mission is to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and quality, affordable homes for all. HUD is working to strengthen the housing market to bolster the economy and protect consumers, meet the needs for quality, affordable rental homes, utilize housing as a platform for improving quality of life, build an inclusive and sustainable communities free from discrimination, and transform the way that HUD does business. And I should note that HUD has a focus on low and very low income individuals and families. And as we go through the information, we'll just talk a little bit about folks who qualify for HUD benefits, although some benefits are more broadly applicable to all populations. Next slide, please. So this is an important thing to know, and this information can be found on HUD's website. But HUD is divided in the field into 10 regions, and you see them listed here, as well as field offices in every state. And some states do have multiple field offices. Each region is overseen by a regional administrator who is a political appointee. And each field office is headed by a field office or state director. And when you go to the HUD website at hud.gov and you go to the HUD regions and you click on the individual state, you're going to find email and contact information for your local HUD field office. So this is a very valuable site with a lot of information that can be useful in making contacts with your jurisdictions that you serve. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit now about HUD and Operation Allies Welcome. HUD's been a part of the federal interagency response and support of Operation Allies Welcome since it commenced in 2021. The picture you see here is the website that was developed by HUD in response to Operation Allies Welcome. It provides a wealth of information for service providers to HUD grantees so that they can understand program eligibility. HUD field offices were immediately engaged with state refugee coordinators to make connections to ensure that the HUD field offices and the programs that operate within their jurisdictions are accessible to the state refugee coordinators and the service providers. In many locations across the country, HUD field offices are participating in statewide or local interagency working groups to connect new arrivals with housing benefits. And those are connections that are made with public housing authorities, multifamily properties, and housing stakeholders. And we'll get into definitions in a little later on in the presentation. The field offices were also ensuring dissemination of information related to benefit eligibility, ensuring that all of our grantees understood the new populations that they're going to be encountering and asking the right questions regarding their status documents to determine eligibility. Work was also done by our fair housing component to ensure that communities understood what was needed for language accessibility. And also work was being done by our Davis-Bacon Labor Standards team. And this is a team that works very closely with the Department of Labor on employment issues to ensure that new arrivals who are coming into the United States who are working on projects that are funded by the federal government are receiving fair wages on those projects. So just to summarize, HUD's been part of this interagency effort, and of course, it's being led by Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement. They're in many ways coordinating a lot of the work at the federal level and across our field jurisdictions to ensure that there's engagement and communication. And this session in particular is one of the outcomes of that interagency effort and response. With this website, I should also note that many of the resources that were developed under Operation Allies Welcome are branded such, but that does not mean that the information contained therein is only applicable to individuals who relocated under Operation Allies Welcome. There's a host of information on this website that you can find that relates to a variety of immigration statuses for new arrivals. Next slide, please. When we talk about HUD, I think it's really important to talk about misconceptions that are out there in the community. Many people hesitate to take advantage of public housing programs because they either don't know where to start or they have pre-existing notions that keep them from moving forward. The first thing that I want to say is HUD does not provide direct services. HUD doesn't operate housing, they don't own housing, and they also don't provide direct homeless services. Those are done by folks who receive HUD funding. There are many forms of housing assistance, and HUD programs are just a few of them. So under HUD, there's public housing, approximately 950,000 public housing units across the United States, tenant-based vouchers, approximately 2 million, multifamily property, which is privately owned and subsidized by HUD. And then there's other service providers in our communities. Low-income housing tax credits are one of the major programs in addition to HUD. And there are approximately 3.5 million units across the country. And the low-income housing tax credit, or LIHTC program, is generally overseen at the state level. In addition, the U.S. Department of Agriculture operates a rural housing program, and they oversee almost 300,000 units across the United States in rural housing areas. So not just HUD, although a lot of people will just refer to subsidized housing as HUD housing, there are a variety of programs that provide housing in addition to HUD services. Another misconception is that HUD programs only serve United States citizens. Programs eligibility can vary, but we have a lot of documents that explain statuses that qualify for particular benefits. So permanent residents and other statuses are eligible for a variety of programs, and emergency services such as homeless services may apply to anyone regardless of their status. It's also important to ask about programs that might be available in your communities because some programs are supported through a variety of funding streams. So applicants should discuss their status with the service provider to determine if it's federal funds, state or local funds, and the applicability of the program. Some people think that HUD programs only serve individuals who are unemployed, and that's not the case. HUD programs serve working families as well as other individuals. Some people believe that HUD housing is substandard in some way. And I should note that HUD regulations require regular inspections to ensure health and safe housing. In many cases, the HUD subsidized housing in communities is far superior to even market rate housing. And HUD housing is not just a roof overhead. HUD subsidized housing providers will also provide support programs that include things like food security, childcare, job training, and financial literacy. So for many individuals, HUD subsidized housing provides the needed support on their path to self-sufficiency. Next slide, please. So this slide, I think it looks very busy and complicated, and it is a little complicated, but we'll go through it here and explain, and you're going to see some commonalities between two of HUD's major housing assistance programs. Now, as I previously noted, HUD does not own or operate housing. HUD provides funding to public housing authorities and contracts with privately owned properties to provide rental assistance. HUD is funded through congressional appropriations, and public housing authorities, that's the flow chart on the left side of the screen, receive operating and capital funds. And these funds are used to offset the rent gap that a tenant will pay for their rent. And generally, a tenant will not pay more than 30% of their income on rent. And the Public Housing Authority does set rents at the fair market value, or FMR, for those who aren't familiar with it. So there's information on HUD's website regarding fair market rents in your areas, and those numbers come out yearly. They're calculated based on a survey of the market. Now, housing that a housing authority provides could be owned directly by the housing authority, or they could be providing what are called housing choice vouchers, commonly known as Section 8, where recipients can receive rent from a private landlord on the market. So the housing authority will operate a certain amount of housing, and then they will also provide housing vouchers where a tenant can obtain a private apartment on the market but receive HUD subsidies. Now, on the right side of the screen is project-based rental assistance, or more commonly known as multifamily, and that works in a similar way. Congress appropriates program funding to HUD, and HUD contracts with private owners through HAP contracts, or housing assistant payment contracts, and those can be between 5 and 20 years, and most commonly they are 20 years. Now, on that first down arrow that you see, it's noted PCBA, and that stands for Performance-Based Contract Administrator. And these are governmental or quasi-governmental organizations that assist HUD with the program. As an example, in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency is the PBCA for Pennsylvania. So they'll assist with a variety of things, including addressing tenant inquiries and concerns. Now, just as I talked about with public housing, a tenant that qualifies and rents through this program will spend no more than 30% of their income on rent. And again, we're talking about that fair market or FMR rent. In this program, the tenant is the program beneficiary, and the funding goes to the service provider, the housing authority or property owner. So there's not a mechanism where it's passed through to the tenant, is the tenant will pay their portion of the rent, and then the HUD subsidy will go directly to the housing authority or the multifamily property. Next slide, please. So HUD funding for affordable housing programs and rental assistance. So we talked a little bit about two of the most common programs, but in addition to a rental assistance, HUD provides funding for housing development. In many instances, HUD funding is blended with state and local funding for projects, and this financing is very attractive for developers who can leverage these funds to finance new development. And many new apartment complexes are mixed income, with a percentage of units being designated as affordable housing. You can see this in some municipalities as you come to know the housing programs that are available. Is some municipalities, as there's new construction going on, depending on the number of new units being added, there's usually a requirement for a set aside that a certain number of those units are affordable. Also, many of our housing authorities have opted to redevelop aging and obsolete housing through mixed financing models. And this not only ensures affordability, but also deconcentrates poverty and increases opportunity in the community. Next slide, please. All right, we're going to provide a little bit more of an overview of HUD program areas so that we understand what's available, and when you hear these terms that you understand what they are referring to. So public and Indian housing, this is probably what matches most people's paradigms when they think about HUD and HUD housing, is public housing authorities. Now, public housing authorities are established through state law, and there are approximately 3,300 public housing authorities across the United States. And they're most commonly at the county level, and for large metropolitan areas, they're also at a city or metropolitan area. And they oversee their programs in those communities. And they are a wonderful resource to connect with, to know about what's going on the ground, because in many communities, public housing authorities are the largest housing developer. The next item on the list is the multifamily housing program. As I mentioned earlier, this is privately owned HUD subsidized housing. The owners enter into a housing assistance payment or HAP contract with HUD, again, most commonly for a period of 20 years, and they will receive those subsidies. There are some resources that are going to be provided at the end of the presentation, but there are mapping tools available through the HUD website that will identify housing authorities in your area, but also importantly, the multifamily housing properties in your area. In various jurisdictions, there are a lot of property, and you might not know to look at it that it might be receiving HUD subsidies. But there's an easy way to go to the HUD website and identify those privately owned properties that receive HUD subsidies. And they can be family-based, disability-based, or age-based, serving the elderly population. Now, HUD's Community Planning and Development Program provides community development block grants, or CDBG funding, to communities. And this can be done on an entitlement basis, where they receive funds regularly every year, or on a competitive basis, where they apply for funding based on a particular grant opportunity. These are most common at the state level, as well as the large metropolitan area level. And these funds are most commonly used to address homelessness in the community, as well as provide funding for economic revitalization. So in your areas, the community planning and development organizations, either at the state or county level, will be receiving that funding, and they're a great resource to connect with to get information on what's going on in your local area. Single family housing, that's a little self-explanatory. That relates to home ownership and federal housing administration. And they connect people to home ownership opportunities. And within single family housing is the Office of Housing Counseling. And that provides expanded services, not just for home ownership. They provide information for renters, for people who are prospective buyers. They provide information for foreclosure prevention. And HUD funds these housing counseling agencies to provide services in the local community. They provide assistance to low-income individuals, but they also serve moderate individuals and any income level individual on fee-for-service offerings, and they operate independently of HUD. And HUD-approved housing counseling agencies can provide assistance to folks who are experiencing homelessness, folks who are interested in renting, to establishing financial literacy, and again, to home buyers and homeowners. And this will be provided at the end of the presentation, but in addition to finding information on our website, you can call 1-800-569-4287 to connect with a housing counseling agency. It's a great resource for consumers, and they also have relationships locally with landlords, lenders, and realtors. And finally on this list is the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. And the mission of that office is to eliminate housing discrimination and promote economic opportunity. I think it's important in this context because you're serving communities that might be new to a particular area or might be facing particular barriers. And your local fair housing partner would be able to address questions that individuals have. And there's two things I just want to point out. And again, you can find this information on HUD.gov, but Fair Housing Initiative programs, or FIP, are local nonprofit agencies that serve areas, and Fair Housing Assistance Programs, or FAPs, are local governments that receive funding from HUD to work in the fair housing space. So just to kind of really stress things here is we went over a lot of programs and information there, but all of these programs serve the community at the local level. Next slide, please. So this is a link to information on resources for refugees and newcomers. I did an interview with the team here, and it's a wonderful article that talks a little bit about resources that are available through HUD for newcomers, and you can use that 3D barcode to access that link. Next slide. All right, we are at another poll question, and I know we're going to be moving into questions and answers, but before we get there, just to poll the group to see, and maybe we can concentrate the conversation on the areas that are most interested for folks. What are you interested in learning a little bit more about? And we'll give a moment here for folks to reply.
Thanks, Michael, so much. We have about 50% of our learners logging in their answers so far. We're going to wait till we get up to that 80% threshold and then share the results.
Excellent. So very curious to see what folks are interested in learning more about, and also looking forward to transitioning here to our question and answer period. All right, so we've got our results in, and they are fairly mixed, fairly even, with single family coming out just a little bit ahead of some of the other areas, but multifamily housing coming in second, as well as fair housing and equal opportunity. So very interesting to see the results, and to see it spread out in that way. So very much looking forward to answering people's questions, and hopefully making the deeper connections on HUD programs.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Michael. It was very informative, and I think sets the stage for our Q&A section now. So there's some great questions. So maybe we can just start with the one that came in first. I think it's a great question to start. Just read it aloud to the group. In our context in Minneapolis, public housing is so well known and widely accessed that new arrivals, such as the evacuated Afghans mentioned, would be facing a 5+ year wait list for housing options. How does HUD adapt to demand in specific locations?
So that's an excellent question, and we've actually been working very closely with communities in that area to identify housing opportunities. These are conversations to have with the housing authority regarding what they're looking at as far as now and into the future as housing opportunities, as well as identifying conversations with local government officials for that. Over the past couple of years, HUD has extended voucher programs in particular communities, particularly to address homelessness situations. So there is some opportunity there. So I would suggest having those conversations, but also working with the housing authority to find out, are they participating in particular voucher programs that can increase capacity to the communities that they serve.
Okay, great. And based on the poll, single family housing was one of the top priorities in what people are interested in learning more on. And also we have a question linked to that as far as FHA and how FHA connects to HUD, and maybe speak to single family housing and what HUD's focus in that area is.
No, absolutely. So FHA is a component of HUD, and they work with lenders to ensure that they are complying with federal laws related to housing and home ownership. They provide outreach regarding loans and qualifications for loans, and particularly as we're talking about individuals who are coming to the United States in a variety of statuses, they would provide clarity to lenders regarding ensuring that they are providing loans to individuals in a variety of statuses, even if they are temporary. So they look at those rules to get people into home ownership. And in some of the conversations that we've been having is that with all of these housing resources, and I say this often when I speak to groups, is housing is something that folks move throughout their life depending on their needs and their situation. And home ownership in many cases is something that's ideal for individuals, particularly new arrivals, where they want to get established in a community and kind of move through those temporary to longer term housing situations to home ownership. So there's an active effort to promote home ownership and particularly engage with newcomers in that area.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Next question we have, you had mentioned that individuals do not need to be citizens of the US, but I think I heard that they need to be permanent residents or something along those lines. What about people who are here as humanitarian parolees, namely Ukrainians under the U4U program?
No, thank you for that question. And that gets into some of the documents that you're going to be able to find online that'll explain the nuance of an individual status and the programs that they qualify for. When Operation Allies Welcome began and we started to see individuals being admitted in a variety of parole statuses, we realized that we needed to get clarification through memos and other materials to communities so that they could understand what statuses are applicable to particular benefits. So I wouldn't be able to speak to specific statuses and the benefits, but just know that individuals who were admitted through those programs, they're often eligible for HUD programs, but you would have to research those documents, determine the particular status, and then match it up to their situation.
Okay, great. And there's a question here about apartment size. I know that family size often comes up as a challenge in housing and during the resettlement process. And the question is, and it's a specific question, but I'll pose it to you. Many refugees have large families. What is the percentage of 4+ bedroom homes or apartments available? I mean, it's a challenging question, but maybe you could speak to the size of, family size and some of the challenges there.
That's a tremendous challenge that we've seen working with new arrivals. The majority of housing that we see through HUD programs is going to be 1 and 2 bedrooms. We do see larger units, 3 and 4, but those are not as common as the 1 and 2 bedroom units. And applicability of a voucher program where you're able to rent on the private market greatly expands those opportunities, but it does require a little bit more research into identifying landlords who want to participate in the program and then properties. And generally, when you're talking about that, we're moving into single family homes that are rented through a housing choice voucher program.
Okay, great. Here's a question. We've had some issues accessing apartments before the client signs the lease due to what the apartments say are strict HUD requirements regarding documentation needs. How do we communicate with these apartments about allowing us to complete our requirements of setting up the apartment before arrival?
That's an excellent question. And if the apartment owner is referring to HUD rules, I would reach out to my local HUD field office or the local housing agency regarding the specifics of what they're requesting. I often hear from folks as well, I was told that this is a HUD rule, but we really need to have an individual conversation on a case-by-case basis to determine what's happening there. So I would definitely recommend, if there's somebody out there who is working on this and they are being told, well, that's a HUD rule, is you need to dig a little bit deeper. Again, contact your HUD field office, contact the housing authority or the property manager to get a little bit additional information.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, there's a lot of questions in here about documentation and just a little bit more specific. How will this HUD housing assist refugees in the US without social security numbers or permanent status? You could maybe kind of unpack that a little bit.
So we have heard there are challenges in getting social security numbers and cards issued to individuals. There are delays there. Those should be communicated to the service providers. My understanding is that if they're in process, that should not delay the benefit. There are mechanisms available so that individuals can make an application. If their social security number is in process, their card is in process, they should be able to continue with that process in anticipation of that number and card being issued.
Okay, and here's a question. I would love to see the voucher programs include stronger housing search assistance so that families don't carry the burden of identifying a unit and navigating conversations with landlords to advocate for themselves. Is that support something that has been done or considered?
So that's an excellent question, and there is work going on right now nationally to enhance those programs. What we've seen is that with housing choice vouchers, those are issued by the housing authority, and the recipient has a set amount of time that they need to identify housing, generally within 90 days. And that can be extended, but we see in certain cases, particularly markets that are very tight, it's difficult to find housing and to identify landlords that were willing to participate in the housing choice voucher program. So HUD field offices across the country are working with their communities, particularly the housing authorities, and also continuums of care that receive HUD funding to stand up landlord liaison programs as well as landlord incentive programs so that individuals who are recruited, landlords that are recruited, see the benefit in that. So these individuals will work with folks who are recipients to identify landlords who participate in the program. There's an ongoing effort to engage with more landlords. Again, just like we're talking about today, where we really want to dispel myths among landlords regarding the HUD rental programs to show them that these are really good programs, these are really good tenants, and it's worthwhile to participate. So I would contact my local field office. I know we're doing work here in Western Pennsylvania to increase the number of landlords that participate in the program and the opportunities there to make it easier for individuals who receive those housing choice vouchers to identify housing opportunities.
Okay, great. Here's a kind of more of a technical question. What, if any, HUD subsidized housing resources or options are available for unaccompanied refugee minors who receive a monthly federal $800 foster care stipend for rent, which typically bars them from accessing HUD-funded housing options, as it is seen as double dipping, but is not enough to afford median housing cost?
I appreciate that question. That's a little bit outside of my technical expertise, but the question was framed really well, is that in certain situations, if individuals are receiving funding through a particular federal program, they may be ineligible for a HUD program. And just as it was framed there, is that it's commonly said you double dipping. So you can't get funding from one program for housing and then come to HUD to get funding through a HUD program.
Okay, great. Next question. We are often given short notice to find housing. For weeks. I know there are long wait lists to access certain housing. Can HUD assist with such tight timelines to secure and prepare housing?
I would speak with local housing providers, particularly the housing authorities. And I know that in many instances, they've got year-long wait lists, but again, they know the landscape in your communities, and they also know those multifamily property owners. Generally, it's a little bit, the wait time for multifamily properties or is a little less than housing authority, but speak to them. They also might be able to identify opportunities in neighboring communities. So the housing authorities often collaborate regionally at the state level, and they would be able to talk about, if there's opportunities, particularly when you're dealing with a metropolitan area where you might have more than one housing authority, is they might be able to collaborate to identify additional housing opportunities.
Okay. Sometimes property managers cite fair housing, saying they cannot work with refugees or resettlement agencies because one, they do not take Section 8, or two, can't treat refugees any differently, use resettlement funds as proof, etc., or use I-94 instead of Social Security card. They are using, quote, fair housing as a way to discriminate against refugees. How can case managers contact so that the property manager can get clarification? And the question ends with directly from the government, question mark.
That's an excellent question, and I would encourage anybody facing that situation to engage with the local fair housing grantee through HUD. And again, you're able to identify those using the HUD website, but it sounds, based upon the way that was phrased, it sounds like that is a fair housing concern, but the opposite of what the landlord is stipulating. It sounds like they're discriminating and they're reversing it. But certainly that's something, if they are saying someone is a new arrival from a particular country and they can't serve them because of a particular status, then that sounds like housing discrimination. And that's something to bring up with your local fair housing grantee.
Thank you, Michael. For areas where waiting lists for public housing are lengthy, what are the best public alternatives to pursue for potentially housing refugee families? Are tax credit properties generally open to working with refugees? And how can refugees meet their requirements?
So absolutely, when we're looking at what's out there, is identifying those other affordable housing options, such as tax credit properties. But that would be engagement with the property owners and managers to determine, what availability there is, as well as what the application process is. And there has been an effort on HUD's part to ensure clarity in messaging to those service providers so that they understand, again, what they can and can't be asking of folks who are coming in. And some of the things that we've seen challenges with are the background checks that some properties require. And when you've got a new arrival to the United States, obviously that's going to prevent or provide a barrier. So have a conversation with them. I know in a lot of cases, those rules have been modified in order to serve the new population. So again, this also kind of intersects with fair housing, because you want to make sure that you're not treating folks individually, but depending on the circumstances of their situation, there might be an accommodation in order to assist them with getting their application in for housing.
Okay, great. Here's a question around vouchers. So housing vouchers in our area are very limited, once a year or less often. Our local housing authority opens up a lottery where individuals can apply for a limited number of spots on the waiting list for the vouchers. Refugees are not a priority population, so they rarely, if ever, get a chance for any spots on the waiting list. This is just a statement, but maybe speak to that a little bit.
So this question has come up as they've been looking at the situation with new arrivals. I'm not aware of any jurisdiction that's provided a preference for that category. Again, they're going to be able to apply just as anybody else. Now, I should note that with those preferences, a lot of jurisdictions do provide for a homeless preference for individuals. So if you know somebody who is a new arrival and is in a homeless situation, they may qualify for a preference to get a voucher. But as I mentioned earlier, when we were talking a little bit about the housing choice vouchers, there is an effort on the part of HUD to expand the voucher program. And we've seen that through the issuance of emergency housing vouchers specifically to address homelessness. So there is some work being done, but I would have that conversation with the local jurisdiction folks, the housing authority, to determine, what's going on there locally.
Okay, great. Here's a question. What do asylum seekers or undocumented folks qualify for?
So again, we'd have to look at the documents that you can find online regarding particular statuses. For individuals who are undocumented, generally they wouldn't qualify for most of the benefits except for possibly homelessness services. But when we're talking about those particular populations, I should also note that if somebody is applying, if you have a family applying for a program, and there's mixed status, generally they can serve that family as long as there is a qualifying individual in that household. So if you were to have, say, a family of 4, where you've got a parent who is in status and maybe a spouse and children who are undocumented, they still may be eligible to qualify for a particular program and it would be prorated based upon the individual who is in status and qualifies.
Okay, great. And along those lines, on the topic of homeless status, or rather, how is it defined according to HUD's criteria? How would that apply for a recently arrived refugee, as they are often provided with temporary housing options? It's a difficult question, but.
It's a good question, and I want to note that there are a variety of definitions for homelessness. So it is very nuanced in many ways. And you'll see it sometimes listed as homeless or at risk of homelessness. Now, individuals who are temporarily housed generally are not considered homeless. And when you speak with, particularly, I would encourage folks to engage with the continuum of care in their community, the local homeless service providers, because they'd be able to talk a little bit about the landscape definition and eligibility for homeless programs. But individuals, unless they are street homeless or residing in a place that's not fit for human habitation, so sleeping in a car, they would qualify. In some instances, if somebody's received an eviction notice, they may also qualify for benefits. And it's just part of the process that there's mechanisms that trigger the applicability of certain benefits. And if somebody is in a temporary housing situation, it's not until that actually ends, that they would qualify for many benefits.
Okay, great. And final question, there's so many great questions, but we'll end on this one. Is there any language support for refugees trying to apply for HUD housing? Resettlement agencies are mainly providing refugees first housing and are previously mentioned that it has to happen quickly. Is there any help for refugees 1, 2, 3 years in? They may not speak perfect English, but looking to transition to more affordable housing.
That's an excellent question. There is a lot of work being done in this space currently that HUD is supporting to ensure language access and language assistance services. We want to make sure that we're educating our HUD program recipients, our grantees, of the responsibility to ensure that language assistance is provided. That might be translating documents. We've heard of unfortunate situations where folks are moving towards an eviction because they were provided with a notice in a language in English, and that's not a language that's spoken in the home. So we want to make sure that the landlords are providing those documents in a language that folks can understand, that they're not using. I mentioned this because of my experience working with immigrant populations, that they're not utilizing maybe a child in the household to interpret for the adults, that they're providing the adults with that information either through documents written in a language they can understand, or providing a translation services. So we're a landlord working with a translation service, interpretation service, so that they can get that information to their tenants.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. That was great. So we're going to end our question and answer period and just review the learning objectives briefly.
And Joshua, would you like me to read through these?
Yeah, just briefly, and then we can wrap it up. We have a survey that I can introduce after this, but maybe just a quick recap, and then we can begin wrapping it up.
Absolutely. I know that this was a very quick hour of time, but I hope everybody has a nice solid foundation where they understand what HUD has been doing in this space, particularly in the last 2 years, that they understand what the misconceptions are, and that they are hopefully going to be promoting HUD programs to the communities that they serve, that they understand a little bit more about long-term and short-term assistance programs for newcomers. And most importantly is knowing how to contact your local HUD field office, your public housing authority, and HUD housing counseling agencies and other housing service providers in your community.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Before we share our recommended resources, we'd like to ask some help so we can help you more. This survey is extremely important to us to improve our future trainings and learning resources. The survey is 3 questions long and should take about 30 seconds to complete. Please take the 30 seconds now to complete this survey. I'll give you 30 seconds. This will definitely provide a lot of useful information for us to help serve you in the future. Okay. Here are some recommended resources for everyone to review. Really, we want to just thank you very much for your time today. We hope that we shed some light on HUD and its programming. I just want to personally thank Michael Horvath for just taking this time with us and just giving us this wealth of information. It's very helpful, I'm sure. I would just encourage everyone to continue to engage with Switchboard and Refugee Housing Solutions. We have a lot of great things planned coming up. Yeah, we really look forward to connecting with all of you in the future. So thank you very much for participating today. And on the next slide, I think we have, okay, so yeah, here's a link to switchboardta.org, Refugee Housing Solutions as well. Also, just at Switchboard, there is a opportunity for everyone to receive technical assistance through the link there. So if you go to Switchboard TA review, there's a lot of great information. I would highly encourage everyone to review and go there if you have any housing questions. And then also at Refugee Housing Solutions, we're going to continue working with all resettlement agencies to bring solutions to this space and support refugees as they go through the resettlement process. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. Again, thank you very much to Michael Horvath. It was excellent. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their day. Thank you.
Thank you.